Another expansion has come to an end, and all the major content we're likely to see until 10.0 is there for us to enjoy, or not. I was recently on the Scrubs vs. the World podcast, link below, and we discussed all things pet battle related in Shadowlands. As I was going over the show notes, I realized I didn't have much of anything good to say. Shadowlands brought many challenges for both in-game and IRL reasons. As such, I want to preface this reflection with a statement. The pet battle community fully understands that we're the last to be given time for fixes and content, as well as the first to be cut from those things when time and resources must be allocated very carefully. So, while I'll be looking at the expansion through the lens of those issues, it's not going to stop observations the community has had over the course of Shadowlands. That said, I've decided to use a review category breakdown to rate this expansion. The categories I chose were fun, quality, strategy, components, stats for content, overall pet PvP, overall pet PvE, and overall for collectors. At the end of all the categories, I'll offer a few suggestions, and feel free to add your own in the comments below. With that out of the way, let's get started. I decided to get the difficult category out of the way first. Fun is challenging to quantify because it varies from person to person. While I find pet battles to be very fun, another player will find them to be an inconvenience at best, and something that should be wiped from the game for how awful it is at worst. Pet battles take time to understand the mechanics of, and for something that should be a mini-game, it can be frustrating, especially if any content an average player would take interest in is locked behind pet battles. I think the WoW devs made a good decision in removing things like reputation as a reward for battles and keeping said rewards pet-focused. I also liked seeing a continuation of the pet level scaling from BFA. Kind of. The problem is pets level up, which quickly ruins the ease more casual players experience and thus frustrates them from going any further with it. This point was especially obvious in some of the fights we're offered, particularly in Maldraxxus and Ardenweald. While strategies are always more plentiful the further into an expansion we get, average players aren't able to just throw a team together and build their confidence by beating the world quest tamers with an on-hand, cobbled strat. Because of fights like extra pieces, mighty minions of Maldraxxus, natural defenders, and airborne defense force, which account for 25% of our world quest fights, there was unnecessary frustration laid upon the player base. Combine that with the utter lack of battle content and the incredibly poor state of PvP, I have to give the fun for this expansion a 1 out of 5. As a personal note, I do pet battles kind of a lot, and there are still world quests that I don't want to do or verify for Zufus because they're just so frustrating. When I feel that way, I can only imagine how others might feel in this situation. As a continuation for fun, the quality of Shadowlands pet battles was uneven, to put it mildly. We'll start with Bastion. Out of all the zones, it was the most balanced, in my opinion, in terms of quality for battles, and that we had the fewest issues across the zone. Anyone remember the constant whinnying of Tiny Hoof, or that Glitter Wing was broken and you couldn't do Megabyte for most of beta? Anywho, this doesn't surprise me since it's the starting zone, which always tends to get more attention and polish. For both the single enemy and NPC teams, I like the flow of the fights, the team combinations, and that it was a good mix of difficulty. While you knew you could just throw 3 elementals at Zola, you needed a little more planning for Stratios' team, or to counter Costas' healing. Second best, in my opinion, was Revendreth. We see a continuation of that good mix for the single enemy and NPC teams, and I really like that they tried something new with Adius. However, that did kind of backfire. We still have an ongoing issue with Adius not being available for Threads of Fate characters under level 60. This was really the only thing keeping it from being on par with Bastion in terms of quality though. The last two zones just kind of felt bad overall, but Maldraxxus just ekes out third place. It has some ongoing issues with extra pieces just being ridiculously overtuned, especially for most family fights in the Family Exorcist achievement, let alone completing the world quest as a casual player. Caregiver Maximilian has a similar issue in getting past Bloog than Bone Crusher, who should have been named Hope Crusher, honestly, but at least Chipper gives you some breathing room, whereas Rotgut just doesn't have that. As for the single enemies, I don't mind them being on the more difficult end of the scale, but maybe aside from Gelatinous hitting like a truck, it really wasn't too bad. Then last, and my least favorite zone, we have Ardenweald. I don't want to drone on about Natural Defenders or Airborne Defense Force for too long, but it feels like the devs took some of the most annoying combinations of abilities, families, then threw monstrous stats on top of NPC teams. Aside from the single enemy world quests and the abhorrent adversaries, I absolutely dread having to go to Ardenweald to verify strats. In fact, I'm postponing it so much, I decided to work from the oldest expansion fights on the site to the newest, and I'll put it off even longer by doing Ardenweald dead last. The quality of the fights is just bad. Now, I'd like to give a comment on quality for the rest of the zones, like maybe the Maw or Torghast, Korthia, or Zereth Mortis, but the only thing keeping me from saying we got zero content is a one-off pet collecting quest chain, which has a bugged-out NPC team, and an Ashley-esque fight against Anthea that most people could probably battle with a team of randos and only pressing the one button. There's easy, then there's that fight. And the quality of PvP, well, I think the numbers speak for themselves there. So again, I'm going to have to give it a 1 out of 5, which is too bad. Because Bastion started us out really strong and made me hopeful for what I would see in later zones. The same could be said for the changes we saw, like in pre-Shadowlands. Though a lot of us were skeptical about them, and it seems like all it did was made fights last a couple more rounds and didn't really change much, it gave us hope that someone had eyes on pet battles and was trying to do something. I might have mentioned I do this a lot, and I'm not joking when I say that pet battles are the only reason I'm still subbed. For other people who are dedicated strategy creators and myself, I don't think I've seen such a pitiful rating for strategies since a couple of the Argus fights, and I'm looking at you, Gloamwing. Last I checked, some aren't even breaking the 3-star rating, and for the first time since I began on my content creator journey with pet battles, there are fights I refuse to make strategies for. Not because I couldn't find something that, given the absolute best case scenario of RNG possible, would work, but because being able to provide something another person can replicate without needing to read a novel explaining everything for every line was not going to happen. The strategy ratings for the different zones follow the same pattern for quality as you'd expect. But whereas quality is something I'd look at with more of a casual player in mind, strategy is more for the difficult end of things, like Family Exorcist. My goal as a creator is to come up with the most stable strategy I can, because I believe the quality of a strat starts with stability. Sure, I could make it 11 rounds, but if you have to use 10 bandages for that to work, are you going to do that, or are you going to move on after restarting for the 5th time? I won't say Shadowlands has made this impossible, but again, there are some fights I don't have strategy for. I might never, because I absolutely do not want to do those fights, as I've already said. This coming from someone whose only reason for being subbed is this system is not a good look. Still, I will say that the strategies I could make outweigh the ones I couldn't. Now, as I like to tell people, I am not the end-all be-all for strategy creation. But I have a pretty good feel for fights that I just need to find a good combination, and the ones where I'd just be banging my head against a brick wall. In the end, I probably have strategies for around 70+% of the Shadowlands fight, depending on the grading scale you grew up with. That'd be like a C-. So not great, but manageable. Now, PvP is a whole other story. I won't go into it too heavily because I don't PvP in any form, not even with my beloved pet battles if I don't have to, but the only strategy for PvP right now seems to be weather. That's it. If you're not running a weather comp, you're likely to get your face smashed in. The already small PvP pet community has pretty much withered away in the face of the weather meta. For these reasons, I'm giving the strategy portion a 3 out of 5. This rating has also made me realize why a 10-point scale is better in some cases because a 3 feels too high, but a 2 feels too low, and I'm not going to muck about with half points, so 3 it is. Now, here comes the fun part. I'm classing components as the assorted bits used to pet battle. I think we've had some amazing pets come out in Shadowlands. They've inspired me to go back to previous fights from all across the expansions and make new strategies. It's been genuinely enjoyable to do so. I just wished that we had Shadowlands content I could use them with, but I digress. We've seen some lovely, fun ability combos like Foreboding Curse and Haunt for the Torghast Lurker, or a combo seen only on a shop pet, Brightpaw, which is Arcane Dash and Prowl on Gizmo. While we've gotten a few filler pets, I'd have to say I could probably find some way to use more than half of the pets we collected in Shadowlands, and that's a really good feeling coming from BFA and the horde of identical slimy pets, and for some reason a whole cadre of crabs now that I think about it. Moving on from the positive in terms of abilities, oh my gravy, there are some player pet tuning issues and outright bugs. I won't go into the laundry list here because Remte has done an amazing job of that in a Google Doc that I'll link in the description. However, this is an issue that's carried on from other expansions, so it's not exclusively a Shadowlands issue. I think it's just become more glaringly obvious now that the devs had gone from I'm writing battle pet flavor text as my Friday night activity off the clock at home to we pushed an NPC pet to live that shows up as a white and blue cube in-game with the name Missing 1 levels of time for pet battles. The changes they've made to try and shake things up didn't change things as much as they expected, I imagine, and it all turned out to be a lot of work for not much outcome. Except, of course, for weather damage buffs, which was something that absolutely did not need to happen and has wreaked high levels of havoc in certain pockets of battles. Now that abilities are out of the way, I will say the rewards were plentiful this expansion, and I appreciate the currency not changing from one expansion to the next. Given that we can potentially collect over 1,500 pets, making things like rare stones, level stones, bandages, and charms as accessible as BFA and Shadowlands has is key. Some people don't have time to see what Legion Tamer is up, or level 500 pets on a Wednesday when Squirt is up. It's a mini-game, not mythic rating. Making the rewards plentiful does not negate the fun of doing the battles. That said, leveling is a big part of pet battles, so please, stop cutting us off at the knees with the reduced XP on 24/7 tamers. Who is it hurting if someone wants to level all their pets on Keo in Vol'dun, or Scylla in Revendreth? You're giving us these pets to level, and these tamers to battle, then throwing us in a sandpit after you've hobbled us. You want players to keep playing, so you put an arbitrary limit on our ability to grind how we like, and in turn, it makes us not want to grind at all, and we walk away. Let people spend time in the game having fun how they like. Stop focusing on keeping us playing by making us grind for every little thing, and keep us coming back by letting us have fun the way we want. As for other changes, it was nice to see the journal limit lifted, that they walked back the covenant restrictions for renowned pets that shouldn't have been there in the first place, that the experience penalty for dead pets was changed from 100 to 50%, and they buffed our level stones. That said, I'd give components a 3 out of 5. The arbitrary grind and persistent bugs and over-tuning are what weighed this score down. This one should be pretty simple. I won't get too into the numbers, but the percentage of pet battling content was steadily rising with each expansion, and BFA gave us 3 dungeons, 24 Tamer world quests across 6 zones, family fights for 19 of those, 4 zones with a total of 28 single enemy battles, all of which have world quests tied to them, a Murloc quest chain, Jennifer, and Ball. Shadowlands was a significant drop to 0 dungeons, which granted we did know was coming, 16 Tamer world quests with family fights for 11 of those, 10 single enemy battles with no world quests tied to them, 1 Murloc quest chain that, as mentioned before, was clearly pushed to live before it was ready, and 1 Tamer daily. This also, in turn, means a big drop in pet battle achievements as well. Achievements overall have been pretty stagnant for pet battles in some regards, especially for PvP, and we didn't even see a new rating with Leash's achievement this expansion. This decrease I attribute the most to the lack of time for devs. Maybe they did have more content planned for other zones, but already feeling the lack of time for pet content, they just chose to 100% scrap it. Still, this big drop across the board for all forms of content means I have to give content a 1 out of 5. Before, I know almost nothing about the PvP portion of the game. So I asked Shenk, a friend of mine who also takes care of the PvP section on the Zufu's website, to give his thoughts on Shadowlands pet PvP, and here's what he had to say. He said, while he only played at the beginning of Shadowlands, he doesn't know how it is now, but he highly doubts anything has changed, and I can verify that. Yes, it is the worst it has ever been. Basically, since 8.3, pet PvP has become horrible, in part because of pets like Anomalous, and from that point it only got worse, even though you keep on thinking it can't get any worse. When the weather buffs hit the beta, everybody knew they were a bad idea, and yet they still let them hit live servers, and they haven't done anything about it since. So, pet PvP nowadays is either Darkness/Sandstorm or just Cleave. Basically, whoever can beat the opponent first in like 10 rounds. And the power creep is just laughable, especially in the stats of the new pets. Before Shadowlands, you were pretty safe with anything that had 341 speed. Now, it's sometimes too slow. There is a magic quill. I think he's talking about the lost quill in Revendreth, and it has an absolutely ridiculous speed stat. I think it's in the 360s. This constant climb in stats means that less and less of the old pets are viable, and pet PvP more or less has turned into rock, paper, scissors, where there are 3 basic strategies with just a handful of pets to choose from in those strats. And whoever was lucky enough to pick the correct strat wins automatically. This means that pet PvP has almost nothing to do with skill anymore, and it's really just about whoever picks the most broken pets. But, as he said, this isn't something that's new to Shadowlands. This trend started in BFA, and at this point, it has just compounded it further into the ground. He also added that there's no new Kunchang pet, but I think we can forgive the devs on that one. I think that's just a personal preference on his part. So, because a combination of my knowledge of the situation and his words and experience, I have to give pet PvP a 1 out of 5. As you can guess from everything I've said previously, as well as in the podcast, PvE pet battles in Shadowlands fell very short of expectations. There was little to no tuning in response to feedback. Some of the general world quests still have narrow margins of success, and their corresponding family battles are worse. If these battles, in particular, didn't make up 25% of our world quests, this issue might not have been so glaringly obvious. However, with no real content added after the release of the expansion going on a year and a half post-release, and likely none between now and 10.0, it leaves this at a 2 out of 5. I decided to give it a 2 instead of a 1 because there are some fights and zones that felt great. And I also included the abhorrent adversaries, which had some fun, quirky battles to strategize around. While collectors can boast the lion's share of pet content for the expansion, not even they were immune to disappointment. Pets that should be cageable were non-cageable, stacked RNG felt rampant, and unfortunate reskins were a few of the gripes. The stacked RNG was probably the biggest one, with the most glaring example being the burdened soul. You needed a specific calling to be up, with the secret treasure that spawns in only one location for the drop, for a relatively small chance at the pet when you opened the treasure. A better example of stacked RNG that wasn't quite as terrible was Lucy and the dirty glinting object, which needs a specific calling, a specific follower out of a group of followers, with an internal cooldown time of 5 minutes on the spawn of the object for a chance at the pet. The only thing that didn't make this terrible or as terrible was Lucy's drop rate was okay. Not great, but not as bad as the burdened soul. There are other examples to be had, but those are two of the ones that especially spring to mind when going over this. The big to-do, though, was the reskin pet for a whopping 10,000 charms, the flawless amethyst bobbleworm. This pet was only slightly larger and a different color than the other bobbleworms sold off the same vendor. When much complaining was had, they added a chance for the pet to give you a rainbow. That's it. At 10,000 charms, this was meant to be our Brutosaur of sorts, a pinnacle of pet collecting. Yet, we were given the pet battle version of a jalopy, which was slapped with a different paint job to the other jalopies with a sparkling license plate. And those were all reasons to jack up its market value to 10,000 charms. They sold us a lemon, which is mildly amusing since its coloring is yellow, and just indicated this was fine by their lack of, well, doing anything about the situation. Then, when Eternity's End released, we were given a glimmer of hope for a pet crafting system that could have been really cool and something we probably would have liked to see moving forward. Locked behind yet another grind the average collector will likely not have time for. Just for the pets, not including the mounts, you need over 8,500 motes. And these are not something you can casually gather like the other currencies in Zereth Mortis. You have to specifically target specific kinds of mobs to get the motes, and they drop at a pittance for such a ridiculous amount needed. If you also want to craft mounts, well, we'll see you in a couple of expansions. On a more positive note, we definitely saw some more fun, unique collecting methods. Puzzling out how to get the Maw-touched Geomental in Zereth Mortis, collecting the skeletal hand fragments for Carpal, vendors with funky currencies, chasing mischievous foxes, and running around /chickening at every poultry in sight felt fun to figure out. I'd like to see more pets, not all of them, but more, with these kinds of player interactions over the keep 'em grinding, keep 'em playing mentality of stacked RNG. So, with all this in mind, I'd give collecting a 4 out of 5. While the stacked RNG felt terrible and large, upon reflection, it really was only a handful of pets out of the many we collected this expansion. This isn't to encourage that going forward, but it wouldn't be fair to have that weigh too heavily on the score. So that was roughly half a point. The other half was mostly for the bobble worm because it makes me want to sigh and head desk. So, if you've been keeping count, our final total is 16 out of 40 or 40%, which no matter what grading scale I had in school means an F. And I really dislike having to give that score to something I love doing so much. It doesn't feel good. But neither did this expansion. At least not for pet collecting. That being said, I fully recognize all the factors and issues that have played into this expansion. I'm not mad at the devs, and I don't think they're terrible people for how pet battles turned out this X-Pack. Though we don't get to peek behind the curtain any, if at all, my best guess is 99% of them were doing the best they could with the time and resources they had. Unfortunately, this means there was really no time or resources for the only portion of the game that I personally enjoy. C'est la vie. However, on the other side of that, I am allowed my disappointment in the state of the game. Now, between writing and helping with Zufu's pet guides, there's one thing I absolutely believe in. I will not comment on something without offering feedback on how things might be improved. The feedback might be completely implausible, and if that's the case, I do apologize. However, there are a few things on my next expansion wish list I'd like to see. Some of these are quality of life, and some of these are content suggestions. Get rid of account dailies for pre-Legion battles. I'm not talking about pet dungeons. Those being once a week per account make some sense, even though they don't apply to normal dungeons. You can do those on every single character. However, with the implementation of world quests that are repeatable across multiple characters, locking old world quests to one daily per account per tamer doesn't make much sense. Rework old rewards. Buff drop rates from pet bags for non-pet drop rewards like stones. Do something with shiny charms. Either convert all the currency to polished charms or give us a currency exchange vendor. Do the same for stones. You want people out doing these battles and you have to make it worth it. Currently, it's not, outside of using the battles to level pets, and we have so many better ways of doing that now. Give us a pet mission table for pet rewards. The missions can be locked to a certain family, and maybe you can't do more than one family type of mission while that mission is up. That's a good way to limit the roster, because having 1,500 pets available can be a bit much, probably. The rewards can be everything from pets to charms, stones, maybe pet crafting materials for the next X-Pack, or maybe for the current one, because Lord knows I need moats. Who knows? The sky's the limit. Cut, stacked RNG, and extreme grinds. This isn't a solely pet battle issue. I think the Activision portion of the company is trying to keep players subbed in a very poor way. Using stacked RNG and extreme grinds to keep people logging in clearly isn't working, and it's frustrating. This is more a general suggestion, but make things fun and replayable, and people will stay. If it isn't an achievement or wild pet, make it cageable. There's an argument for not doing it with shop pets, but you have TCG pets, which were bought with IRL money, and really, putting shop pets on the AH is absolutely no different from tokens as far as I can see, but maybe someone can explain to me a little better why that would be a bad idea. But in my opinion, I think outside of wild pets or achievement pets, anything in the game should be cageable. Speaking of shop pets, collector's edition pets should be available on the shop. This game has spanned coming on 18 years this year. There are people who will become adults this year that were born the same year WoW came out, and some of them play this game. Collector's editions are nothing more than a way to say I was alive and playing the game at this time and just happened to have the money for a collector's edition. That's it. Put them on the shop. Rebalance abilities and certain pets. Oh, this one's going to hurt because as the Shattered Defenses and Black Claw change showed us, doing this means a lot of work for people who are involved in this type of thing, but at this point, it's necessary. Certain pets and abilities are way overtuned. We've gone over some of them, but very specifically, weather needs to have a look taken at it. And Blinky with Mana Flare, I've pointed this out on Twitter. I've brought it up in a couple of Discords, but Mana Flare is broken. I'd hate to think of all the strategies I'm gonna have to rework as part of the suggestion, but it needs to happen, and one of the biggest culprits is Anomalous. Rework of the PvP system. This is probably the biggest one, and I can only hazard a guess on how to do this, because as I said, I don't pet PvP. I don't player PvP. I don't PvP. I don't like it. One thing I do know is that a lot of people are requesting that Blizzard get rid of pet battle groups, which makes sense, given the low population of pet PvP battles. A lot of people end up sitting in queues for 3 hours to go against the same person, and that's just boring and not okay. There also needs to be some kind of incentive to do the pet PvP battles on non-critter weeks. Maybe you can have a daily from Brianne to battle with a team of mechs for your choice of 3 blue stones, a purple stone, or some X number of charms. There's more that needs to be done and can be done, but I'll leave that discussion to people who actually pet PvP, because I will say most of my suggestions tend to get laughed down because they're, I don't know, implausible, and I don't pet PvP, okay? Oh, well, this video is likely long enough at this point, so I'll leave it there. But what do you think about Shadowlands pet battling, and what would your score be? Do you agree with some of my points, all of my points, or none of my points? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and maybe we can get this out to people who will actually listen and can maybe make some changes when they have the time. My biggest fear about this whole thing and the lack of content is that pet battles are going the way of archaeology, just sort of slowly fading into the background until it disappears. And I don't want to see that happen. And I know quite a lot of people who also don't want to see that happen. So hopefully that's not the case. We'll all keep our fingers crossed for 10.0. If you have any suggestions or cool ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments below. It's a wish, but the devs may not ever see any of these, but we can geek out about this pretty cool aspect of the game together. Anywho, until next time, I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you for stopping by, and happy battling!